Good evening and welcome. My name is Sarah Walters. I'm the Deputy Mayor of Selwyn District and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you here this evening. The format for this evening is that I'm shortly going to hand over to Kim, who will introduce the panellists, and they'll give a statement, and Kim will manage a bit of discussion, and then after that you get an opportunity to ask questions. Emphasis, questions.
Thanks, Sarah. In 2001, 13 years ago, the Royal Commission on Genetic Modification recommended that New Zealand should proceed cautiously but not close the door on GM. The subsequent regulations have been damned for being too cautious or not cautious enough. But there is a fairly strong view, I think it's fair to say, among scientists and researchers that our position on GM food needs readdressing. So the question tonight, as Sarah said, is should genetic engineering play a part in New Zealand's future? The implication is that as things stand, it won't. So what does New Zealand have to gain either way? One of our panelists wrote a few years ago, and I'm glad to say this in view of such opinionated people in the audience, that what makes New Zealand great is that those who are both strongly for and strongly against GM can sit in the same room and maintain a quality dialogue on the topic. And I'm hoping he's proved right tonight. Our panel, some brief introductions. Professor John Hickford. He directs the operation of Lincoln University's Gene Marker Laboratory, which is engaged in trying to breed healthier sheep, cattle and goats.
Thank you very much. Have we got a microphone there?
You don't need one yet.
They haven't turned it on.
Dr. Christine Dann, long-time researcher and writer about the political economy of food and environmental sustainability. She's an active member of the Agri-Food Network, a trans-Tasman organisation of food and agriculture researchers. Philip Gregan, Chief Executive Officer of the New Zealand Wine Growers, with a keen interest, as you might imagine, in international trade, given that there's only so much wine New Zealanders can swallow. Dr. Tony Connor, Science Group Leader for Forage Improvement at Agricultural Research. He's focused on biotechnology and genomics in plant breeding programs, such as ryegrass. Dr. Rob Cruikshank, a molecular ecologist with a background in genetics. He's a senior lecturer in entomology at Lincoln's Department of Ecology. He's the ecologist on a committee that scrutinises applications to work on genetically modified organisms. And Dr. Richard Newcomb, Chief Scientist at Plant and Food Research, Associate Professor, Evolutionary Genetics at the University of Auckland School of Biological Sciences. He's been in charge of Plant and Food's genomic activities, which are aimed at enhancing the value and productivity of New Zealand's food sector. As Sarah said, each panelist will speak for 2 minutes. We'll talk amongst ourselves for an hour or so. And then there'll be half an hour or even 35 minutes of questions from you. John.
Thank you very much. It's scary to come when people quote my words back at me. I want to take it back 20 years, first of all, to when GM first became something on the radar around the world and within New Zealand, because it was a time when we didn't have DVDs, cell phones the size of small bricks, there was no Google, no Wikipedia, no Facebook. Justin Bieber was born. Place whatever value you want on that. World's population was 5.66 billion people, okay? Since that time, the world's population has grown to 7.24 billion, so there's been phenomenal population growth, most of it across what we call the third world. That stated, the World Health Organization still says the main cause of death in this world is hunger. It's still the single biggest threat to world health. That's coming straight from the World Health Organization. But the situation's actually improving. So that malnourishment, which is primarily in that developing world, has more than halved in the last few years. And that's That's attributed to two things: improving food supply and better geopolitical stability, which in the context of Syria and the Middle East and so on is quite remarkable. But the world is a more stable place politically, and food supplies are less disrupted by warfare. As of 2012, so coming forward 20 years, and Tony's figures are more up to date than mine on this, but there's 11 different crops, I believe, grown commercially. The key figures here is it's across 170 million hectares of the world's land and arable land. That means nothing to most people, but it's about 6 and a bit times the size of New Zealand is now under arable crops. So if you fly across the US and you look down on corn, you're probably looking at GM corn. It is everywhere, and that's undeniable. It is there, and it's being picked up bluntly because it is useful for the people growing it. It's creating wealth for them. We can debate other issues around that soon. 20 years ago, I said we don't have anything too much to worry about with GM food. I think I'm right so far. Nothing too bad has hit the radar. That stated, we could still see something. Who knows? We can't predict the future on this. I want to sort of really take on this topic by saying, really one of the great freedoms of living in New Zealand, I know this is not on my sheet, is that we can get to choose what we eat. For most people, that probably means we choose too much, because we know New Zealand is the second most obese country in the world. We choose the wrong things, but we have freedom of choice. That is not something, and I rate that as a very big freedom of choice of what we eat and how much of it. The majority of the world's population don't actually have that freedom. That's a problem for them. So I think it's great that we have the freedom in New Zealand to try and choose to eat non-GE food. That's stated, and I'm sure we'll address this in a lot more detail. I'm not convinced, singularly unconvinced, that we can actually live and eat food in New Zealand without being exposed to GE food all the time, okay? And I'm not going to put a list of things up there where we are eating GE products, things derived from food, directly or indirectly, but I don't think it's possible to live in modern New Zealand, and I'd be interested in what the other speakers say on this, without actually being exposed to GE food. So if we put up the moot of should GE play a part in New Zealand's future, Kim, it already does, and it will continue to do so. That's what I thought.
Thank you. One question for the audience. Can you hear him when he goes off mic?
That was clear?
It's cool.
Oh, good, thank you.
Christine.
Kia ora tātou. In 1942, Professor E.R. Hudson, Professor of Agriculture and Director of Canterbury Agricultural College, you'll know there's 2 buildings on this campus named after him, wrote a booklet called The Future of Farming. He said, without adopting any drastic changes in farming practice, New Zealand is capable of greatly increased production. However, further advances are likely to depend more upon market demands and upon economic and social conditions than upon technical developments. Professor Hudson's words are as true and as wise today as they were 72 years ago. I am sure that everyone on the panel and in the audience wants a bright future for New Zealand, a future where there is plenty of safe and nutritious food for us, a prosperous primary economy based on high demand for our primary produce overseas, a clean green countryside where every stream and river is safe to swim and fish in, and the fish, birds and invertebrates and native plants are thriving. There are lots of prosperous family farms where the farmers earn a good living while farming sustainably. There are high standards of animal welfare, and there is a thriving agricultural research community working with farmers and growers to help them produce top quality products that sell well while enhancing rather than detracting from the natural environment. We might also not want to be the only country in the world where the Prime Minister goes abroad to make public apologies about our food industry. If this is what we want, then the question we need to ask is, will genetic engineering help us get there, or will it hinder us or even prevent us from reaching these desirable goals? If the answer is that it will not help us reach these goals, and that it will even prevent us from reaching some of them, and I hope you'll ask me why, because I've got lots of evidence on that. And I've also got lots of information on what is helping right now to make our environment, our economy, our farmers and our nations more resilient and healthy. Then the answer to the question, should genetic engineering play a part in New Zealand's future, has to be a resounding no.
Don't beat around the bush, Christine. Philip.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Just for the record, I'm not a scientist, so nobody's allowed to ask me any questions about
But we'll give him an
science.
honorary doctorate for tonight, all right?
Over the last 30 years, the New Zealand wine industry has built a global reputation for its products. Our exports have gone from virtually nothing in the mid-1980s to about $1.3 billion today. We're number 8 in the list of New Zealand export goods. Our goal is to lift that to about $2 billion by 2020, and I can assure you we'll get there. The reasons for the success of the industry over the last 30 years are many, but the underlying driver is that our wine quality and our branding speak very strongly about the place in which our grapes are grown and our wine is made, and the people who work with those grapes and on the land. We see those things as very, very strongly interlinked. They are what speak about New Zealand wine. Key components of our messaging are about varietal diversity and regionality and sustainability. Sustainability is a critically important component of the mix because the people who buy our wines, they don't have to, and our wines aren't cheap. They have expectations about how those wines are produced because they want the wines that they consume to express something about themselves as a person. In that context, that personal context, concepts such as natural, artisan, handmade, craft, they're all concepts that are deemed to be good, while the industrial, the scientific, the chemical, the manufactured are often perceived to be bad. Whether those perceptions are true or not, that's not the point. That is, they are the perception that these people hold, and they are our customers. GM, GE seems to fit in the minds of many consumers squarely in the bad box. Again, whether that perception is true or not is somewhat irrelevant. It's the perception that counts. So in New Zealand, while our grape growing and winemaking is hugely dependent on good science, biology, microbiology, chemistry, etc., the fit of GM is hugely problematic in the minds of many consumers and as a result in the minds of many wine producers in New Zealand. The point I'd like to make is nobody has to drink our wine anywhere in the world. They choose to. I don't think, there's an old saying, never say never, and I think we would apply that because you never know what's coming around the corner. But if I was starving in South Africa or starving in Africa or wherever, I might have a slightly different opinion. Thank you.